Hi! This is Dinosaur King, and today, I'm gonna do something a little different this time around. Now, for those of you who are aware of my hybrid, the Dracopteryx, you may recall what happened at the end of the video. And for those of you who haven't, let me try my best to recap that, while also going into the topic of today's video. So, you may want to sit down for this one. Roll the clip! About a few weeks ago, the Indominus 2.0 was created and was unleashed onto Isla Nublar as a large, hyper-aggressive predator that is not only capable of self-reproduction, but was also the root cause of the hybrid wars itself. Due to not only posing a threat towards the ecology within Isla Nublar, but also the entire world due to carrying a pathogen that would have spread like wildfire if it were to be left unchecked. To vanquish these monsters before such a disease would spread any further, Vincent, along with many other Dracopteryx, were created. And of course, in this scenario, they succeeded in not only being able to fight, but also outcompete the Indominus as apex predators of Isla Nublar, due to their flying capabilities, which allowed them to not only remain safe from any unwanted attention, but also being able to reach various places the Indominus can't. Such places, for example, are the mountains, where many Dracopteryx often nest and migrate throughout the island in flocks, as well as being able to target other viable prey, such as Pteranodons and Dimorphodon, along with being able to snatch up fish from shallow waterways with their talons. Especially when it came to snatching up many juvenile Indominus, as well as scavenging off some of the recently killed Indominus due to cannibalistic conflict against their own kind, once prey on land became scarce. All these factors had simply led to their extinction and the revival of life within Isla Nublar that came afterwards. Well, that was until Mount Cybode erupted, which had wiped out most of the inhabitants of the island, leaving only a few Dracopteryx left alive as they flew away from the catastrophic event, which ultimately led to various Dracopteryx, Vincent included, to find their way towards the mainland within many different continents, most of which winded up within Europe. While a few sightings of Dracopteryx began to become well known, specifically nearby mountains, there have been some debates on what to do with these creatures. Meanwhile, a new threat had made itself known within the world's oceans. Deep within the seas, a new monster, unlike anything we have ever seen before, had emerged. A monster with unrivaled strength, speed, and intelligence. Intel had informed the global government that this hybrid, also known as Vex, was created by Goji Guy, who is the head of Goji Industries, to dominate the world's oceans, which ultimately resulted in creating the most problematic invasive species for not only local fishing industries, but also many of the aquatic environments wherever Vex goes. Many attempts of protecting these environments were performed by various different companies, as many of their hybrids were sent to deal with this looming threat. Some of these aquatic hybrids that were created had mixed results. Some were overpowered by Vex's speed and power, others seemed to target other aquatic hybrids along with some of the native fauna as well. Some even managed to put up quite a bit of a fight, but only to have Vex retreat afterwards. The most important ecosystem within the oceans, by far, are the coral reefs, which provide a natural habitat for a vast array of diverse marine life, which not only provided them food, but also places to spawn, and provides a sanctuary for their young. The Baltic Sea itself just so happens to have one of those exact environments, which was also said to be where Vex was currently sighted. And of course, the same geneticists behind Vincent, along with the rest of his kind, have the right idea on what exactly to send. Although, instead of creating something like a cephalopod, a marine reptile, or even a cetacean to do the job, they had something else in mind. And of course, I did recently see Vex's backstory, And upon seeing that she was basically forced to fight various non-hybridized aquatic species within captivity, this would heavily imply that Vex, along with their siblings, are basically gladiators. And in order to face against a gladiator, the Reef will be needing a champion of its own.
Is this not why you were here?
Also, I kind of wanted to try telling a story in the same fashion as with Greek and Roman mythology. Now, before I get straight into the genome of this hybrid, there are a few factors that I've taken into consideration. Much like how my last hybrid, Vincent, was made using real-world animals, though only without any Jurassic Universe variants of any prehistoric animals this time around. In addition, I'm going to be limited to both aquatic and semi-aquatic animals specifically, though I'm going to be using invertebrates, mostly of the arthropod order, with one exception, of course, which shall be used to create the very genome of this hybrid. Starting off with the base genome, I give you the peacock mantis shrimp. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why use a mantis shrimp as a base genome? Wouldn't that have a few drawbacks? Allow me to explain. The peacock mantis shrimp is one of the many wonders of nature for a few reasons. These shrimp have a pair of 2 unique eyes, which possess 12 photoreceptors, which is 9 more than our own eyes in comparison. This not only allows the mantis shrimp to see colors that we simply cannot, but this also allows them to see linear and circular polarized light. Not to mention that their eyes also have something called trinocular vision, which basically allows them to see 3 images as if it had 3 independent eyes in one package. Not to be mistaken for their spear-armed relatives, peacock mantis shrimp have a pair of clubbed arms, also called dactyl clubs. And let me tell you, these things are nothing to sneeze at. The reason why I say that is knowing how these arms function. These raptorial appendages involve a latch mechanism that stores energy in a spring-like structure, which, once released, the energy is transferred to the club of these arms, propelling each of these arms forward with a speed up to 50 miles per hour, as well as an acceleration rate of a .22 caliber bullet. Each of these arms can deliver blows up to 15,000 newtons of force per punch. This allows them to break shells, bones, and even solid glass. One may assume that this force would wind up blowing their arms up from the force alone. However, the peacock mantis shrimp naturally has a way to counter that. These arms consist of complex layers within their exoskeleton, which allows them to basically deliver each of these powerful blows while remaining unharmed in the process. Not to mention that these punches create cavitation bubbles during each of these powerful strikes. Once these bubbles collapse, it effectively creates a shockwave that amplifies the initial impact. These bubbles can also reach temperatures of around 4,000 degrees Celsius or 7,232 degrees Fahrenheit. As for their IQ department, mantis shrimp are highly intelligent, which gives them the capacity of learning, forming complex social behaviors, and sophisticated visual abilities in which only another fellow mantis shrimp can see. This trait is especially useful for avoiding conflict against each other due to their aggressive and mostly solitary nature. With the peacock mantis shrimp as the base genome, I don't really need to apply other species for those 3 exact reasons. However, it's still going to need some upgrades, as a regular mantis shrimp's punch against Vex would probably be nothing more than a hard flick to her. One of these upgrades is size. For that, there could be no better pick than Dracopteryx. Besides the Japanese spider crab, the Dracopteryx was one of the largest aquatic arthropods on our planet that we know of. These Eurypterids, commonly referred to as sea scorpions, can reach sizes around 2.3 to 2.6 meters, or 7.5 to 8.5 feet in length, basically making them longer than an average human if they were to lay down next to each other. If this size is applied to my hybrid, it could potentially increase the punching power of the base genome of our hybrid. Though, I will still keep the front end of the mantis shrimp, which may just make my hybrid longer by 2 feet in comparison. I will also be applying the tail of the Dracopteryx as well, since the tail of many sea scorpions are not only strong enough to propel themselves forward when moving within the water, but it's also quite flexible, as it could move in an up and down motion similarly to many cetaceans, such as dolphins and whales to name a few. Though, speaking of propelling themselves forwards, mantis shrimp are quite fast within the water, and it would be a foolish mistake to simply increase its size while potentially sacrificing such impressive swimming speeds. This is why I have chosen the Icarus as the third species of this genome. One of the first apex predators of our planet, the Icarus was well known for such a reputation. While its mandibles are impressive, the flexible flaps on the sides of its body, as well as its fluke tail, allow it to chase down prey with swift and incredible speeds. I want those flexible flaps, as well as the tail fluke, applied to my hybrid's tail immediately. This would not only make it a fast and swift swimmer like its base contributor, but its speed and agility could potentially be on par with that of Vex. And of course, to add a bit more flair to my hybrid, I will also be applying similar eye stalks, while also keeping the unique trinocular set of eyes provided by the peacock mantis shrimp. As for how our hybrid may bounce back from any encounter that may cost them an eye or a limb, there is no better pick than the axolotl. Nah, I'm just kidding. The better choice for this genome in that case would be the lobster. It might not look like much, but lobsters have an incredible ability to regenerate any lost appendages, much like any other crustacean such as crabs. Despite younger lobsters having a fast rate of regeneration, it would take adult lobsters 5 years in order to regrow their limbs. Which might not be much now, but if applied to our hybrid, this would at least help our hybrid bounce back into action if in the event one of its side fins or any of its limbs were to be torn off. Not to mention that lobsters also have strong tails in order to propel themselves forward, similarly to Dracopteryx, although it also aids them in locomotion and balance as well. Of course, this would also come in the same package as the tail of Dracopteryx, as well as the side fins of the Icarus, which would provide my hybrid with a strong and flexible tail. Although, the tail is also quite a glaring weak point. All Vex would really need to do is grab our hybrid by the tail before thrashing them around. Or, alternatively, tear it off before devouring it afterwards. Thankfully, there are 2 ways to counter that. One of these factors is in the form of the blue-spotted stingray. Also known as the blue-spotted ribbon-tail ray, these ribbon-tail rays might look harmless upon first glance, but don't be fooled. They have a secret weapon located on their tails, in the form of a stinger. Oh, sorry, did I say stinger? I meant spines, which are filled with a compound of enzymes, neurotransmitters, as well as a form of serotoxin, which causes severe muscle contractions and pain once injected into the bloodstream. Of course, I will be applying these spines to the tip of my hybrid's tail in the form of genetic selection in order to give it an edge in that department. Of course, the purpose of these spines are for defense. They might also become lethal weapons if our hybrid knows what to do with them, especially considering that these things could literally take out an eye, or even pierce their bone. Speaking of defense, that's where our next contributor will come in. Let me introduce you to the purple sea urchin. Now, as strange of a choice as something like the purple sea urchin is, they're actually animals, and also fellow invertebrates at that. Many sea urchins are well known for their famous form of defense, in the form of their spine-like projections on the outer surface of their bodies. In the case of the purple sea urchin, these spines are short yet sharp. However, they are quite brittle, which means they can break easily. Thankfully, though, these spines can grow back rapidly, which is shorter than that of the regeneration rate of lobsters in the case of their appendages. Of course, through careful genetic selection, these spines would be applied to the back of my hybrid's tail. I am also going to be adding the same serotoxin to the spines, as well as the toughness of the spines of the blue spotted ribbon-tail ray. Even with Vex's crocodilian immune system, which would make the serotoxin nearly ineffective, it will certainly be painful to bite into, as if we were biting into a pintack sandwich with the sharp ends of those tacks facing upwards. As incredible as most of those traits are, my hybrid would still be exposed, since mantis shrimp do need places to hide from both predators, as well as being able to catch prey off guard for the most part. And with its current size, that would prove to be ineffective. But then, that was when I came up with an idea. A delightfully devilish idea that can change the odds of my hybrid's method of ambushing prey and potentially catching Vex off guard. Now, I have seen how mantis shrimp would dig burrows within the sand, rocks, coral, as well as other hard substances in order to create tunnels to do exactly just that. However, there is one other animal that would give my hybrid a proficiency in that department in terms of tunneling through the sand. Let me introduce you to the boppet worm.
Oh, great heavens!
Boppet worms are what many would consider to be the closest thing we might actually get to real-life sandworms. And like in the same fashion, these sea-dwelling worms create tunnels within the sand in order to fit their entire bodies into. The secret to that would be the bristles on the sides of their bodies, which allow them to effectively tunnel through the sand. This trait is helpful for when it came to lunging out from the sea floor in order to snatch up unsuspecting fish with their terrifying jaws before pulling them deep into their burrows to be eaten alive afterwards. If these unique bristles are added to my hybrid, the burrowing capabilities of my hybrid would be enhanced, and thus being able to mostly avoid Vex's echolocation for the most part. And if that wasn't scary enough, lionfish are considered to be an invasive species within the Atlantic Ocean, which is also the same area the boppet worm happens to live within. While the lionfish may have venomous spines, there have been a few instances where boppet worms have and did snatch up lionfish with their mandibles before dragging them down in the same fashion as the rest of their prey. The answer to how they're able to do this without succumbing to the effects of the lionfish's venom would be their immunity system, which does give them a resistance towards various forms of venom and poisons alike. If applied to my hybrid, it would allow it to gain a resistance towards whatever poisons and toxins that would come its way, and thus gaining an advantage on ambushing any sea monster that dares enter its home. It's brilliant! Anyways, now it is time for our geneticists to sequence the very genome for the champion that shall serve as the protector of the reefs. Introducing Megalochorus gladiatoris, its name meaning Great Shrimp Gladiator. This, along with a few other members of the species, shall serve as the very protectors of the reefs. Considering that I gave my last hybrid Vincent his name, I shall be bestowing a proper name for this very champion. Now, I thought about naming it Hecatoncheires since both the mantis shrimp and the Hecatoncheires do have multiple arms, but ultimately, I decided to go with something shorter. I'd like you all to meet Hector. At full size, Hector is about 12.99 feet or 3.96 meters long, with a height of 4.33 feet or 1.32 meters tall, and weighing around 181.4 kilograms or 400 pounds, which doesn't really limit his movement speed due to being underwater most of the time. But besides that, Hector is already the largest aquatic hybrid that was ever created. Well, the possibility for large arthropods isn't quite out of the question. Take the deep sea isopod, for example. They're as big as a regular-sized bowl. They don't seem to have the same issues as, let's just say, any arthropods on land would. Specifically, the ones that existed during the Carnivorous period. If any of these arthropods were to be brought here, they would ultimately suffocate to death due to the low amount of oxygen within our atmosphere, while the oxygen back then was quite extremely high, which was more than enough to support giant arthropods on land. Looking at you, Jurassic World Dominion! But anyways, let's get to Hector's backstory. Hector was raised inside of an aquarium within a hidden facility. Upon hatching, he was no larger than a coin. Of course, starting off pretty small, Hector, during his first few days within the tank, was quite fast and agile. As he grew larger, his exoskeleton began to become dense. Seeing as Hector is adapting to the environment within the aquarium, the geneticists were pleased as Hector was developing very proficient skills against many of the fish and crustaceans they fed him. Upon becoming just as large as a lobster at its maximum size, the geneticists had sent Hector into the Baltic Sea, where he found his way towards the reef. Underwater cams showed that Hector was developing his skills quickly through experience. From ambushing prey to even establishing his place within the ecosystem, it didn't take long for Hector to adapt to the Baltic Reef, while also preying upon a few species of fish, sharks, crustaceans, and even a few cephalopods to name a few, that would cross into his territory. At least when he's hungry. Upon reaching full size, Hector's become the very champion within the coral reefs of the Baltic Sea itself. This is just as the global government had intended. The only thing left to do now was to play the waiting game. One day, while Hector was submerged within the sand, he sensed something coming towards him. Using his antennae and eyes that stuck out from the very sand, that was when he spotted it. One of the very few sea monsters that's been terrorizing the seas. Although, it wasn't just any other sea monster, it was Vex. She had just unknowingly stumbled into Hector's turf without even realizing it. Upon seeing Vex, Hector burrowed deeper into the sand, using his antennae to locate whether or not Vex would even leave. However, it was during this time that Vex was searching for prey. Using her echolocation, she sensed something ahead. Of course, not knowing any better, she slowly approached the reef before something burst from the sand as it placed itself between Vex and the coral reef itself. At first, Vex stopped for a moment to observe this creature. She had never seen anything like Hector before. Compared to the various fish, cephalopods, as well as a few marine reptiles and mammals she'd faced before, seeing Hector would have been like seeing an alien for the very first time. but it was clear that Hector wasn't going to let Vex into his territory scot-free, meaning that Vex would either need to leave this area or fight through Hector. Of course, seeing as though Hector was smaller than her by comparison, Vex decided to go with fight, thinking it might be easy. And thus, the Leviathan had challenged the champion of the Reefs into inevitable combat. So, in a fight between these two, who shall stand and who shall fall? I don't know about the rest of you, but I think Hector could easily solo Vex. But then again, I can also see some other circumstances that would say otherwise. Hector can strike with his dactyl clubs faster than Vex could even snap her jaws, while his swinging speed will be slightly faster than that of Vex. And considering that she's up against an aggressive aquatic arthropod, she could be able to crack into Hector's shell thanks to having the strong bite force provided by the saltwater crocodile, is what I would have said if her teeth weren't that of the barracuda. Even as Goji Guy stated in his video about Vex, Vex's method of biting leans more towards a method of bleeding rather than a method of crushing, which would prove to be a difficult task as the spines on the back of Hector's tail would just wind up giving Vex a mouthful of spines filled with serotoxin. While the serotoxin would barely affect Vex, the inside of her mouth would be bleeding due to biting into Hector's spines. And because of Hector's dense exoskeleton, Vex wouldn't be giving Hector gnashing wounds as easily as many cetaceans, fish, and other cephalopods in comparison for those exact reasons. Trying to exploit any weak points Hector does have, like the front part of his body, legs, and underside, effectively puts Vex into a dangerous position within Hector's striking range. While Vex does have a quick bite, Hector is able to strike with the speed on par as a 22 caliber bullet, while striking with a force that would allow him to break shell, bone, solid glass, and even through metal thanks to his enhanced size. Not to mention, Hector can also inflict damage with these powerful strikes more than once. This means that Hector could easily fracture one of her ribs, break one of her see-through fins with a nat 20 level of luck, damage one of her gills, or worse, break her jaw. And considering that there has been a case where an orca has died from bleeding out after breaking their jaw in a fight, Vex could also suffer from a similar fate if she's not careful. Though her crocodilian hide may cushion some of Hector's strikes for the most part, it would still not be enough to shrug off these powerful strikes completely. I'd imagine that being struck by one of Hector's punches would catch Vex off guard at first, as it would certainly make Vex reconsider her options before things get worse from here. Going for the front would result with being struck with powerful blows from Hector. Going underneath Hector would risk having one of her eyes, gills, and even hide punctured by sharp barbs at the tip of his tail. I say that I could see other circumstances that would say otherwise, because there are a few scenarios where Vex might be able to kill Hector. The first is using her speed and cunning to trick him into striking first, before evading him, and then ramming into him with her head afterwards in order to stun him. Or alternatively, she could even use her tail to do something similar, but Hector is faster than Vex, while he is quite cunning as well. Only in Hector's case, he would also be quite crafty with his surroundings. Using his environment against Vex would prove to be vital. He could even trick Vex into ramming into a rock wall. And believe me, there are a lot of rock walls within a coral reef, especially within the Baltic Sea. Now, considering that this is more of a 1v1 scenario, I don't exactly need to explain what would happen if Vex was with her siblings and they just so happen to encounter a group of Megalocaris. Especially since both Megalocaris and their non-hybridized counterparts do live in a mostly solitary and territorial lifestyle anyways. But regardless, all it would take is a bit of overconfidence for Vex to make a few mistakes before gaining a few injuries from Hector himself, which would become inevitable even if she decided to retreat after taking a few blows, thus leading to the Leviathan's very demise. But realistically, I'd imagine that Vex would think twice after Hector lands a first or second strike upon getting too close for comfort. Or, if she would understand that Hector's martial spread stance is a sign for her to stay out of his turf, This might lead her into retreating before the fight could even begin. However, given how aggressive and territorial Hector is, he wouldn't be backing down until Vex leaves his turf, if in the event she ignores his warning stance. This might lead them to coexisting with each other, as Vex would lurk within the deeper parts of the Baltic Sea, while Hector patrols the coral reefs. As long as they respect each other's space and boundaries, of course. Hector had done well in protecting the reefs, leaving him victorious in humanity by proxy. After Vex was dealt with, news began to spread about how there is a way to protect the reefs from the rising hybrid threat within the oceans. And with positive feedback, along with these results, a few more Megalocaris are being created and are scheduled to being put into each of the coral reefs around the world. While the whereabouts of Vex's siblings are still in the process of being looked into, the rest of Europe is going to be having their hands full since the recent arrival of the Dracopteryx, which are currently settling within a few mountain ranges, specifically near forests and plains. Of course, some of the other companies are not pleased with the arrival of these flying apex predators within the mainland, and there may soon be attempts of challenging these draconic rulers of the skies with a few hybrids of their own. So I started thinking about making a video like this for a long time ever since my last video on Vincent. With a variety of aquatic hybrids being created lately, I had to give it a shot. Originally, I thought about using the boppid worm as the base, with something like the paleofish for size for what is going to be an aquatic equivalent of a death worm, but then I just kinda scrapped the idea. Not because of the fact it would be too dumb to strategically snatch something like Vex into the sand, but she would not only be fast enough to evade it, but also smart enough to avoid something quite like this. And also, she can apparently escape from being constricted. I was still thinking about a type of aquatic arthropod whose skills would be on par with Vex, with only a few exceptions, of course. And as soon as I came up with that idea, I got to work on Hector, whose species would be acting as a way to protect the coral reefs from other aquatic hybrids, such as Vex, along with a few others, to name a few. And of course, after hearing that she'd wind up within the Baltic Sea, which also has a few coral reefs of its own, I thought it would be a great way to make a video on Hector, while also giving some insight on how Vincent, along with the rest of his kind, are doing. And of course, I have read your wonderful comments in my video on Vincent. A lot of you seem to love his design. Along with some questions and a few other comments, I replied by explaining and answering on a few things here and there. Speaking of which, there's a few things I want to address with Vincent. First of which would be the recent increase of Vincent's weight, as muscles and organs would add weight, along with thick scales, including the tail. However, he can still move quick on his feet on land with a speed that is on par with that of giraffes. And he can also fly just as well as he could before. And of course, the big thing about when I mentioned adding some of the same material from the exoskeleton of the bombardier beetle to my hybrid, I was of course referring to the beak, talons, and scales of this hybrid to provide protection against its own acid. Nowhere did I imply adding the entire exoskeleton. There's also one thing about the boiling acid of the bombardier beetle, is that it could burn skin and eyes, just not solid bone. And after discovering that Komodo dragons don't just have iron on the edges of their teeth, but they also have iron within their claws and scales as well. Meaning that adding that material to the claws and beak of Vincent wouldn't be necessary, as his beak and claws would be sharp enough to pierce through the thickest of hide and scales without many issues. However, that material is still going to be added to the outer layer of Vincent's scales to give him a form of protection against his own acid, as well as the acid from other members of his kind. And as for how he doesn't burn the inside of his mouth, I used the same mechanics of the spitting cobra, where the boiling acid would be shot out from a fang-like structure within the upper part of his mouth. Specifically, between where his beak and tusk-like growths are located. In addition, the boiling acid will be shot out in a forward-facing cone, not the other way around. And with that out of the way, I'd like to say that it took some time drawing Hector, especially with figuring out how to make his arms strike. In the end, I'm happy with how it turned out, especially with drawing and coloring the unique trinocular eyes he possesses. Shoutouts to Goji Guy, who was the creator of Vex, in which I don't exactly have beef with, just like how I don't have beef with Goji Center themselves. Anyways, at least Hector's not broken in any way, right? Oh, well, I can't say I was expecting that. I guess I'll see you all around. Bye-bye!